Hey, what is going on, guys? So today we're going to be discussing a cultivated meat company which claims to not use fetal bovine serum in their production process. I find this interesting because although some companies like Upside Foods claim to have developed an animal component-free medium for the development of cultivated meat, they still do use fetal bovine serum in small amounts. In the past, I made the mistake of thinking they don't, when in fact they still do. If you look at the FDA submission letters from the two companies that have just been approved by the FDA, Upside Foods and Good Meat, they both still use fetal bovine serum in their production. And if you don't know, and I've covered this in videos before, the extraction method for fetal bovine serum is quite cruel. The good news is that many companies are seeking to eradicate the use of fetal bovine serum entirely, so hopefully this becomes the industry standard over time. I've even been told by Jenny Stochkovic, which I don't know if that's how you pronounce her last name, but I hope I didn't, humanely slaughter that. But she did say that Upside Foods has a process without the use of fetal bovine serum, but it has not yet been approved. Now, obviously, this is just her word, and I couldn't find anything confirming this, but now, referring back to Jenny, I saw her make this post on Twitter. It says, "Behold, a 100% cultivated, lab-grown meat Big Mac. Would you eat it?" To which somebody commented, "How much fetal bovine serum?" She said 0 and that the company uses their own alternative. This caught my attention, so I reached out to her and asked which company she was referring to in this tweet. And she told me it was O Meat, a cultivated meat company from Los Angeles, California. So I went over to their website and found some interesting details about their process. First, I found this, which speaks on the alternative to fetal bovine serum they use. It says, "The secret to O Meat's approach is a patented process that uses plasma humanely collected from cattle to support the growth of a small tissue sample. This sidesteps the need for inhumane inputs like fetal bovine serum or artificially engineered growth factors. O Meat taps into the natural biology of the cow and lets nature do its work. It's a simple, elegant approach that solves the cost and complexity issues that some say cultivated meat could never overcome." So first off, they are still using animal inputs, just not fetal bovine serum. And I have to admit that when I see the word humane, I do inevitably have a little bit of an eyebrow raise, given how much we've seen animal agriculture throw the word around to justify, mass murdering animals for a cheeseburger. Usually cultivated meat companies, from what I've seen, end up saying things like painless as opposed to humane. So this made me wonder, does this company have any ties to animal agriculture? And I was hoping I was just being paranoid in my assessment here. So I decided to keep reading about their process through their FAQ section on their website. Let's take a look, and just a heads up, I'm going to be skipping parts that I don't think are worth reading for the purposes of this video. Let's get into it. So this section says, "How are you different than the plant-based burgers I've been hearing about?" And it says the plant-based burgers are, well, made from plants. They imitate meat. O Meat, however, is the real deal. It's delicious meat that's simply grown directly from cells outside the animal. No sacrifice required. It's a way more sustainable, humane, and clean way to get meat on the table with no animals or plants harmed in the process. So this all sounds very interesting, but there's a couple things I'm curious about. First off, when they say it's way more sustainable, do they mean in relation to plant-based burgers or burgers derived from conventional means like animal agriculture? Because I'm sure it's more sustainable than conventional meat grown through animal agriculture, but more sustainable than plant-based meat? I'm not sure. I would need some evidence for that. This section is also a little odd because I've never seen cultivated meat companies compare their cultivated meat environmental impact to plant-based meat, but instead, meat that comes from animal agriculture. I mean, maybe some companies have, but I haven't seen this before. Secondly, they also mentioned that no plants are harmed in the process. This is a bit confusing for me too, considering I don't know how you even harm a plant. And lastly, they said no sacrifice is required. Now, to be charitable to them, they very likely just meant no sacrifice in the sense that an animal has to be killed for their meat. But at least in regard to animal products, there is still a sacrifice of cow plasma. But maybe I'm just being a little too pedantic here. How does the cow plasma collection work? We collect plasma once a week from our cows. The process is similar to how humans donate plasma. Because plasma regenerates quickly, it does not deplete the cow. So this does sound far less unethical than fetal bovine serum extraction. And I also found in this article concerning their process that the blood is given back to the cows. But while I was reading this, I grown curious as to where exactly they get these cows from. And the answer is right here. It says, "Where do you get your cows from?" We have our own farm with a herd of about 75 Holstein cows rescued from nearby farms. The cows graze freely on 30 acres of land on O Meat's farm in California. So this is interesting. The cows they extract the plasma from are animals rescued from animal agriculture. So this sounds like an animal sanctuary that still uses the animals for their plasma to generate cultivated meat. But I'm curious as to what they do with these cows if for whatever reason they were unable to donate sufficient amounts of plasma each week. I mean, hopefully they still allow them to be taken care of, and they don't treat them like conventional farms do when an animal is no longer able to provide for them, like downers. And if this happens, or even one of these cows die from natural causes, do they just rescue more cows from animal agriculture? And how do they do this? Do they end up buying these animals from animal agriculture? These are all things that I'm super curious to know. This section says, wait, you have your own farm? And it says, yes, in the last year, we converted a piece of severely degraded land into a lush grassland. We planted phytonutrient-rich grasses ideal for a cow's diet, as well as local growing conditions. We've implemented a number of regenerative practices for soil health, like no-tilling, cover crops, rotational grazing, and natural fertilization by our free-roaming herd. The vegetation on our farm holds about 30,000 gallons of water per acre, minimizing runoff or the need for watering. So this just sounds like a regenerative animal farm that doesn't actually kill their animals for meat. This section says, can you tell me about your farm practices? It says, Omeat has worked with the leading animal welfare scientist, Dr. Christina Horbach of UC Davis, in designing its farm and approach to animal care. This work has entailed the development of processes for collecting tissue samples and plasma. Omeat's collection practices employ positive reinforcement and are designed to ensure the holistic well-being of the animals. We have a full-time veterinarian at our farm, along with a number of vet techs providing close care for Omeat's herd. Now, this is interesting. It has been confirmed that UC Davis receives funding from a major livestock lobby group, and the Clear Center, which is an academic center dedicated to helping animal agriculture operate more efficiently, receives funding from UC Davis. The founder of the Clear Center is Frank Mitloehner, not sure how to pronounce that, who is a professor in the Department of Animal Science at UC Davis. And he is a big defender of beef and has even testified in Congress defending it. So all of this made me find it very interesting that Dr. Christina Horbach from UC Davis is the animal scientist being used to help design their approach to animal care. Now, I'm not implying that this detail alone just confirms that this company is tied to animal agriculture, but it does make me raise an eyebrow. It says, if you have your own farm with cows, how does this address the environmental issues you mentioned tied to beef? So they mentioned the environmental issue tied to beef earlier in the FAQ, I guess. It says, fantastic question. It does so in two ways. First, Omeat's approach dramatically reduces the number of cows needed to create beef, which is one cow providing plasma once a week. We can create many cows worth of beef annually. This means we can feed the planet with only a fraction of the current number of animals currently used in meat production. Omeat's farm is designed with the ultimate goal of being carbon negative, largely by implementing a host of regenerative agricultural practices. So I'm not gonna lie, this whole carbon negative thing with the regenerative farm reminds me of the whole White Oak Pastures claim that they created a carbon negative when in fact they did not. Mike the Vegan and Plant Chompers have covered this greatly. But at least in this case, they said it was their goal to achieve a carbon negative and not that they indeed have, while citing poor evidence to support the claim. Here it says, do you plan to work with existing farmers and ranchers to implement Omeat's approach on their farms? It says, absolutely. We see ourselves first and foremost as a meat company, and our goal is to be the bridge to the future of the meat industry. We're perfecting a sustainable operation that existing farms and ranches can implement, generating the same volume of product but with a fraction of the overhead. It's way more efficient and we don't have to sacrifice the cow. So after a little more digging, I did find in an article from Ag Funder News that the founder of Omeat claims that although some commentators argue that the whole point of cultivated beef is to displace animal agriculture, the founder, not going to try to pronounce that, claims his approach would still enable a 95% reduction in cattle production and transform the unit economics of cultivated meat. So it seems they don't really have the goal of eradicating animal agriculture like many cultivated meat companies do, but instead they want to work with animal agriculture, but in a way that involves getting them on board with cultivating meat from extracting plasma each week, as opposed to the conventional method of breeding and murdering animals for their flesh. While this method is indeed better than, say, factory farming or even local farms, I remain a little bit skeptical over this company and their ties to animal agriculture for all the reasons gone over in this video. And just to be clear, I'm not making this video to initiate some kind of thought process for vegans to be super skeptical over every cultivated meat company trying to create cultivated meat. I just thought some of the details covered here warrant some amount of skepticism. I'm happy to know this company has found a more ethical alternative to fetal bovine serum, but I continue to hope for a completely animal-free production process for cultivated meat. It seems as though this method is more ethical than factory farming, quote, humane local farms, and maybe even cultivated meat companies that use fetal bovine serum, but not as ethical as plant agriculture, but it could have more of an ability than plant agriculture to replace reliance on conventional animal-based agriculture for people who still want animal products. And assuming the founder of Omeat's numbers are legitimate, this method has the potential to not only prevent the existence, suffering, and murder of 95% of cattle for beef production, but also the remaining 5% would simply be giving plasma each week. I remain curious as to how this company would function if there was no animal agriculture to rescue animals from. They'd have to opt for breeding, right? Oh, and in my last minute of researching for this video, I found this. This article is titled, Cultivated Beef Company Omeat Begins Generating Revenues but not from meat. Cultivated meat startup O-Meat, which uses nutrients harvested from the plasma of, quote, healthy living cows in its cell culture media, has started generating revenues by selling these nutrients to other companies in a serum called Plenty. Billed by O-Meat as an ethical replacement for fetal bovine serum that is equally effective at a fraction of the cost, Plenty is rich in cytokines and growth factors, proteins that encourage cells to grow and differentiate. The serum will primarily be used as a supplement for cell culture media used in O-Met's in-house production process for cultivated meat. Before it can get its meat into consumers' hands, however, the Los Angeles startup is generating revenue by selling the serum to firms in biopharma, regenerative medicine, and vaccine development that use in vitro cell culture. So, they're not just using this plasma to generate cultivated meat, but they're also using it to manufacture a kind of serum that is, quote, more ethical than fetal bovine serum, and selling it to companies to generate revenue. And maybe this revenue is being used to further fund their project of cultivated meat with this plasma? I don't really know. After reading all this, it's clear that this company still views animals as commodities. And after reading this part of this article in particular, it becomes harder and harder for me to believe that they can sustain all of this simply by rescuing animals. I'm not making the claim that they are for sure breeding animals for these purposes, but I just find it hard to believe that they're not. Who really knows? Anyway, guys, that's the end of the video. What do you think about this company? Do you think they're this like weird, cultivated meat company that's animal agriculture in disguise? They're certainly an anomaly when you compare them to other cultivated meat companies with everything gone over in this video. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you support my work and want to get early access to it, you can click the link in the pinned comment and support me on Patreon. And if you don't know, I do have a book going over most, if not all, of the anti-vegan arguments you're going to hear online. If you want to get that as well, that'll be linked in the pinned comment. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dude.
Fuck off, I don't want anything to do with you. Don't ever speak to me again. You're a fucking piece of shit.
Even vegans don't get your weird, stupid wannabe sense of irony here. Who is your audience? Nobody gets these dumb jokes. Dude,